something really minor, it could be something quite major. So, so today we have Colin from One Acre Fund and also Vincent from Ashoka, and they're going to be talking about their experiences in trying to combat some of the regulatory challenges that they faced, how they were able to do it, because a lot of times it is difficult to kind of work with the governments or try to get through to the governments, especially when social enterprises are smaller, don't have the clout that large enterprises do. And especially when they can, when what they're doing is actually quite meaningful and can have a big impact. And we'd actually like to hear from other entities as well to see what were some of the regulatory challenges that they face that they hope could get resolved, and maybe come together to see, you know, if we can come up with good solutions for addressing it. So with that, I will hand it over to Colin to introduce himself and One Acre Fund and his presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Oop, I've lost my mute button. Or can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay. Hi everyone. I'm actually gonna see if I can turn off my video so that I save bandwidth here. So you guys can see my slides. So nice to see everybody. My name is Colin Christensen. I'm the Global Policy Director for One Acre Fund. I'm based in Washington, D.C. now, although I used to run our government relations team based out of Kigali. So I lived in East Africa for many years, but moved back to D.C. a few years ago. And that's how I came to know the community of practice, actually. And so today, what I really want to touch on are a few key themes. The first is that, you know, really talking about how social enterprises should be seen as really key to the development goals of governments. But I want to explore some of the regulatory regimes that really that limit this scale and this impact. And I want to use One Acre Fund as a case study of that. And then I'm going to turn over to my colleague Vincent, who's the East Africa Regional Director for Ashoka, and he's going to talk a little bit about how some of the social entrepreneurs they work with face similar challenges. And like Elaine mentioned, I mean, we really hope that this space over the course of the year can be a space where social enterprises can start coming together to discuss these kind of challenges more and kind of brainstorm solutions together. Because I think often social enterprises deal with these kind of regulatory challenges on their own. But we're hoping that today's session is just sort of a introductory session to the types of regulatory challenges that we face as a sector. So, you know, firstly, just a little bit about One Acre Fund. So our mission at One Acre Fund is to serve smallholder farmers, to improve their livelihoods. You know, we're very, you know, we primarily provide agricultural services, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But we actually do a number of things that you know, that are just focused on improving their livelihoods beyond just agriculture. I think the key thing to understand about us is that we're a nonprofit, but we work like a business, right? Like a social enterprise, but we're a not-for-profit social enterprise. I mean, our goal is to never be profitable. Our goal is to serve the most vulnerable smallholders in the countries where we work.
We target to get 20.
So we get about 70% of our revenue for our field operations from smallholders, from what they pay us, and they're paying market price for the goods and services that we provide. And by doing this, we've been able to really minimize the need for donor funding, and so we've been able to scale very rapidly. So we started in Western Kenya 15 years ago with 60 farmers, and we're serving almost 1.5 million farmers today across East and Southern Africa. And the primary service we deliver is what we call our bundled service delivery. So we provide, to start with, we provide asset financing. So we provide seeds and fertilizer and other products on credit. And that's really important because if you're a farmer, you don't have access to cash. If you're a smallholder farmer, I should say, you don't have access to enough cash to buy that seed and fertilizer yourself without the credit. And banks are not going to lend to you. And so providing that asset financing is critical. And then secondly, we distribute those inputs. You know, firstly, we source very high quality inputs and we distribute them to the very rural areas where our farmers live. And that's also important because when you do have cash as a smallholder farmer, it's very difficult to buy high quality inputs in a rural area. We then give trainings throughout the year, weekly trainings. We have a network of 6,000, 7,000 field officers across all our areas of operation that are, full-time employees, and they manage actually all of this sort of life cycle of product. But one of the things they do is regular trainings, and those trainings are really important to maximize the return on the investment of the fertilizer and the seed and all the other products. So if you instead of broadcasting seed or overusing fertilizer, we teach farmers how to plant in rows and how to microdose so that they really can generate as much profit as possible. And then we also do work on the market facilitation side of the equation. So we've expanded across Africa. Most of our work is around Lake Victoria. Our biggest countries are in Kenya and Rwanda. But we've really been able to grow. And as we've grown, the relationships we have with government are really critical. And we invest a ton in our government relations work in every country. I mean, we have 60, 70 full-time staff that are just doing government relations work. And that's just because working with government is complicated and also critical. And I would say that the challenges we face on the regulatory front really do vary across our countries. So for example, Rwanda is a very highly regulated agricultural economy. We have to work within a very complicated subsidy scheme that just takes a lot of our time. Or in Ethiopia, the government wasn't even interested in our core program, which forced us to pivot to just doing agroforestry. In Nigeria, which is one of our newer programs, it's really still in a pilot stage. It's such a decentralized country. We work in Niger State that we haven't even figured out how to work yet with the federal government. So just to emphasize that there's a variety of ways we work with government. But for today, I wanted to deep dive a little bit in our work in Kenya. So Kenya is our largest program. It's our oldest program, our second largest next to Rwanda. We have about 450,000 farmers there that we serve. And like I said, I mean, this is where One Acre Fund grew out of. And we have very strong relationships with the government there, from village chiefs up to the national ministry. We have a great working relationship. Actually, the deputy president came out on a field visit that I attended a couple of years ago, sort of showing that national support. But despite that strong relationship, we've still faced a number of challenges that I want to speak to today. So there's three big policy roadblocks that I'd like to dig into. The first is a question of organizational taxation that we are worried will limit our social mission. The second is how input regulation, regulation, when I say input, I mean inputs that farmers need, increases the cost to those farmers. And these are farmers that are really living at the margins of poverty. And then the third challenge is how regulatory red tape slows products from reaching those farmers. So to start with, I want to talk about the Kenya 2020 Finance Act. Please, everyone, no one fall asleep as I talk about the Finance Act, but I'll try to make it interesting. The Finance Act in 2020 introduced a 1% minimum tax on all gross revenue for taxpayers who carry out a business. And this is regardless of whether they make a profit or not. So we're not registered as an NGO in Kenya, but as a branch office of a foreign company. And even though our host company in the US is a nonprofit, that doesn't matter. We're just seen as a company. So if this law is implemented, social enterprises are going to have to pay this minimum tax on all the revenue they raise in a year. So this effectively means that the revenue that a smallholder pays us, that we then use to go purchase inputs to buy for the subsequent season so that they can grow enough food to feed their families, that's going to be taxed. The philanthropic revenue we bring in to cover our deficit would be taxed. And if this goes through, our ability to scale and deepen our impact is going to be severely hampered. And this is true, I think, across the sector. The good news is that the High Court last year ruled this act unconstitutional. For-profit companies don't want to pay it either, and they contested it. It's right now in the Court of Appeals, but the Revenue Authority is fighting it in the courts. They could take it all the way to the Supreme Court, and we'll have to see what happens. But at the very least, because of this uncertainty, we've had to put aside quite a big amount of money to cover it in case the tax is does actually come through. And so it's already having an immediate effect on our ability to deliver services. And I would say, you know, whatever happens in the long term, I think this really was a wake-up call for us. You know, we can't register as an NGO in Kenya, given the nature of our business. Our operations are just too close to what a business does. So we wouldn't fit under the NGO registration process. But as a company, we're clearly never going to be treated differently. I think that's what this process has shown us, that, you know, despite our social mission, there's no way for the Kenyan government to think differently about our work. And we definitely understand that they need to expand their tax base. But, you know, if social enterprises are given no accommodation for their social mission, in some sense, you know, this kind of a tax sort of works against what the government wants to do with their own development mission. So instead of seeing us as a partner to improving their citizens' livelihoods, it's just going to make it more difficult for social enterprises to deliver what's ultimately the government's development priority as well. So the second example I want to give has a little bit of a happier ending. So I don't know how much people know about the process of growing maize, but it's really important to dry maize properly after you harvest it. And actually, for years, one of our most popular products in Kenya has been tarps, and not because farmers need tarps to make shelters, but because they use them to dry their maize. They put the tarp down on the side of the road. If anyone's traveled in Kenya and other countries, you can see in rural areas farmers driving their maize all the time on tarps. And drying maize efficiently is critical to avoiding post-harvest losses, to avoiding aflatoxin growing on it. But the standards for tarps in Kenya were based on the assumption that they'd be used for shelters. And so they required a thickness and a tear resistance that just ultimately made them more expensive and less affordable to farmers. So recognizing this problem, we started a series of meetings with the Kenya Bureau of Standards, KEBS, to try to convince them to create new standards. And so our GR team got involved over quite a long period of time, 6 months to a year of work, to convince them. And so we first started by creating a detailed market research analysis that showed that there was clear farmer demand for cheaper tarps to be used for post-harvest drying, that post-harvest grain loss is a really big problem for the country. And we actually tied it to the government's Big 4 agenda on food security. And then we also showed that farmers are extremely price sensitive. And so we could show how significantly demand increased when we were able to find ways of lowering the costs. And we also showed how other countries have made similar accommodations in their standards. So, we did this work. We, on our own dime, we brought together a meeting of the KEBS technical committee to discuss this. We took them out to field visits to local manufacturers to show the interest from the business sectors. And after lots of different votes at different levels of the bureaucracy and a public review process, we were successful. And this is a screenshot of the new standards for tarps for post-harvest use. And so, we hope that this new standard is going to ultimately lead to two payoffs in the long term. It presents design requirements that are more fit for purpose so that the manufacturing costs will go down. And it also opens up room for Kenyan businesses to manufacture at a cheaper rate, which reduces the price for customers over time. The last example I want to give, which is also around a regulation of an input, is focused more on how regulation can limit the supply of a key product. So most countries in Africa suffer from low seed productivity because of the lack of access to improved seed. One Acre Fund actually is only able to meet 40% of our bean seed demand due to this low production, like the lack of access to high yielding varieties. And so farmers are just stuck recycling low yielding varieties. And this is a real problem because beans are a real critical source of nutrients, of protein in particular for them. And so it has real implications for the goals of improving nutrition for farmers. But our suppliers are just unable to import enough based on regulatory barriers. And so, as opposed to maize, which they can easily import to Kenya, there's a lot of approved varieties. They just don't have the clearance to import most bean seeds. There's questions about qualities in other markets, about variety naming. I mean, this is the most frustrating thing. The same bean could exist in two markets, but if it's just named something different, we can't import it into Kenya. And so we're definitely exploring ways of solving this, much like we did with the TARP's work, but it's going to take time. And I think a key point to make is there just is no clear mechanism for us to bring these market failings to government. There's no agency in government where we can discuss this. And I think that gets to the sort of the key questions that these experiences raise for us, which are firstly, is there a way for social enterprise to be granted a more unique registration status that, really would help us prioritize scale and impact? It sees us, as different to NGOs, as different to companies. And then separately, is there room for governments to create some sort of an agency to work with social enterprises to more efficiently solve these market failings, especially smaller social enterprises that don't have large government relations teams that face similar challenges? It's just very inefficient to be dealing with each of these challenges in an ad hoc way. So we're really interested in exploring, solutions to both of these. And as part of that, and just to end, I think it's important that we also show government what we are delivering. We cannot expect accommodation from government if we do not demonstrate that we really are delivering value to the lowest income populations, the most vulnerable populations. So I just want to close by just flagging how we calculate impact as a possible way to get through to government this value. So we don't just take what farmers tell us they're growing at face value. We don't just take self-reported data. We actually physically weigh the harvests of our farmers, and we create statistically comparable control farmers. So we know what's attributable. So many things can increase harvests for a group, for an area, and we need to know what our program is doing. And so there's ways you can do this rigorously, and we're able to show, in this 3-year average from 2016 to 2018, we're actually able to monetize what that means for a farmer. So we're able to say that a farmer in One Acre Fund earned $115 more than a farmer that wasn't in One Acre Fund, which means it's a lot of money if you live in a rural area. And so there should be a way, if we can quantify our impact this way, and we go to government and we say, we are delivering this impact, and X or Y regulation or tax is literally working against what we're doing, our hope would be there's a way that we can sort of recognize that we are in this together and that they can help us deliver this impact for the whole sector, through thinking differently about how they regulate. So that's the One Acre Fund experience. But I'm really thrilled that we have Vincent on the call, who, Ashoka works with social entrepreneurs across the region. And I think they're able to speak to this kind of experience at a much higher level than just us. So I'm going to stop sharing. And Vincent, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Colin. That was quite insightful. I will also just have my camera on for a few minutes just for introduction, and then just to maximize on the connectivity here. My name is Vincent. I lead Ashoka's work in East Africa. Ashoka, for those who don't know about Ashoka, Ashoka is credited for having one of the organizations really that brought to the fore the whole concept of social entrepreneurship. So I've been with Ashoka now almost 10 years. And I was just listening to Colin, what the details in terms of some of the steps that you guys have taken as One Acre Fund to address some of these challenges, and I'm really thrilled because it's similar story, across many of our social entrepreneurs, whether they're registered as NGOs, whether it's a company limited by guarantee, whether it's foundations or trusts. You find they come across these barriers, and they are really working hard to figure out solutions and how to work with government. And I like what you said at the end. We should have a more holistic approach so that it's not, this kind of ad hoc approach, which also really makes it hard. So I've just tinkered my presentation a little bit as you are presenting, just to cut on a few details, because then I think it would be great to hear from the rest of the participants also, what's their take. But let me just share my presentation just to get us here. I hope you can see it. Okay, good. So I just started by talking just briefly about Ashoka. What Ashoka has done, we started since 1980. We've elected 4,000 leading social entrepreneurs as part of our fellowship network. And in 2021, we were recognized by the NGO advisor named us as the 5th in terms of the impact of our work. And basically our work revolves around 3 key tracks. The first one is searching and selecting men and women with incredible innovations, addressing different challenges in the societies in all the sectors, and bringing them into the global fellowship network, where what we do, we support them through, building a community around them, connecting them with our, some of them are pro bono support partners. We also have some trainings for them, like the Globalizer, which is a global accelerator program. We have an impact transfer program, which is basically to support them to transfer the impact of their work from one geography to another. And then also we just drive towards more of a collaboration between the social entrepreneurs and also with the government and also with companies and you name it. We are big on collaborative entrepreneurship. So that's basically what we do with the leading social entrepreneurs in our work. But another track that we are very keen on, and you probably will get to hear about this a lot when you engage with anyone from Ashoka, is to support the next generation of social entrepreneurs. And in fact, what we believe is that, they might eventually end up being the next generation of social entrepreneurs or maybe just first-class employees. So we're working with the young people and, we have these different touch points with different institutions that work with young people to ensure that every young person is growing up as a change maker, getting to know about the change maker skills of empathy, teamwork, leadership, and creative problem solving, because these are some of the skills that we are seeing with all our fellows. The third one is basically to support, the growth of this ecosystem, social entrepreneurship, social impact ecosystem, in so many ways, including sharing some of the trends and patterns that you're seeing from the works that we do, like the Changemaker map, which is what I want to base my next slide on. In terms of what are the insights we are seeing, what are the challenges that we are seeing, what are the opportunities we are seeing, and sharing that with the ecosystem to build a stronger, more collaborative and more informed ecosystem. And we draw this from a global perspective, regional perspective, and also at a national level. So recently last year we did this mapping. Not much details, you can't see the details from the slide that I have here. But this was basically our attempt to understand what are the challenges and what are the opportunities social entrepreneurs, who are basically the leading change makers in our network, are grappling with in terms of the challenges and what are the opportunities that they're looking for, they're looking to tap into. And this is important because for me, I was looking at all the challenges when Colin reached out, and I noticed something that I hadn't noticed before. And this is basically where the issue of legal status and policy framework lies. Amongst this was about 700 plus social entrepreneurs in different stages of their innovations, early stage to those who are already at the point where they want to scale. And between women and men, I mean, you can see that on the slide. The legal and policy framework affect them differently. But more so, I mean, it was important for us because this is something that was being mentioned, in as much as something like financing would always be, or funding would always feature in some of these similar, kind of research. It was important for us that this was explicitly mentioned, the legal framework and the policy framework, hindering the scaling, hindering even just the establishment of social enterprises. And so what I've done here is to really just high level, Colin, I was thinking, what are some of the insights and lessons that we have drawn from this finding? And for my conversation also with a couple of social entrepreneurs in our network. One, and this is where this entire challenge really stems from. One is that the whole concept of social entrepreneurship is really in its early stages of development. And this is something that has been, I would say, validated by a couple of researchers, including one that I was involved with, the British Council, that there is no government policy that explicitly is aimed at social enterprises. And the effect of this, I mean, is quite obvious. Some of the things that you've mentioned from One Acre perspective, where there is no legislation that expressly relates to social enterprises, wherever, I mean, then it means, this is already like a huge barrier from the very beginning. It's a huge barrier from the very beginning. So as such, you find that social enterprises, they try to make use of existing legal structures, and this varies from what would define a private company limited by guarantee, what would define an NGO. So it's all over. It's all over. In fact, I was involved also with the Social Enterprise Society of Kenya. I think there is an attempt here. We engage them, seeing that they would really work well as an advocacy, arm for this ecosystem. And when we started the exercise, I remember there's a consultant who came in and laid out about 10 policies and legislations and strategies and frameworks that social enterprises should kind of find a way of fitting in, right? And that is absolutely a challenge. I mean, it's just impossible. And in fact, even some of the fellows that I'm highlighting in the next slide, in terms of what they have done, they are very categorical. They have not successfully done it. Because you see, when you cannot place yourself anywhere within these existing policies, whether it's, like now we're talking about this strategy of Vision 2030 or Agenda 4, and you're supposed to place yourself within those kind of areas, or whether it's the new acts that Colin, you've just talked about. I mean, it becomes really hard for social entrepreneurs to identify themselves and also make a case for themselves. Like, we are absolutely different from all these different legal regimes that you're giving us. So that's one of the insights that you've picked. And then also the other thing, this is just to put it out there, because I know this conversation should be leading to some concrete, definite next steps. It is really daunting to think about policy formulation process. So again, I said, let's think of something more holistic. Let's not do ad hoc, So because we don't have a policy, we don't have a legal framework specifically for this, and you look at the steps that are supposed to be undertaken for us to even have a draft policy. I don't know, I'm not sure how far Ashoka has gone on this, but the last time we were kind of trying to validate the results, and I was looking at the number of steps that we still had to go through, quite a lot. And the thing is this, so you approach government and you say, hey, look here, the financing, the taxation regime does not favor us. And they will point out at something, some kind of amendment, some other law, and they say, hey, why don't you then situate yourself within, say, company limited by guarantee or a company, and amend that law instead of thinking of an entire policy. So this is a process that has like 22 steps, so you can imagine, I mean, and that is just to be very conservative, and you have like all these validations that you need to do. You have to make a case for it to the government, the entire bureaucratic system of the government. So I'm only just laying that to say that the cases that I'm showing here, they have been quite categorical since we spoke, that we have not succeeded in doing this. We have Felicity in Rwanda, who was struggling with, where should I identify my social enterprise? Is it an NGO, or is it, the government, I think, was trying to push it to be a company, right? And for her, what you're seeing is that her board was quite reluctant to do that, because there was a fear then that you get into that space, then you're going to lose the social mission of your enterprise, right? So the lack of broad understanding and clarity on what social entrepreneurship is all about, I would say, has made some of these fellows and a lot of other social entrepreneurs to kind of come up with hybrid models. So where you have a for-profit and wing and a non-profit wing, a social impact wing. And that's what Felicity eventually did. Then there is the issue of inability to access capital or equity. I mentioned someone like David Kuria, who started the Eco Toilet. I think at some point he was trying to get some investors to invest in the project, but again, from where he was registered as an NGO, it was not going to work. I mean, it became such a huge challenge. So he was missing out on huge potential here to scale this work because, I mean, out of support of investors, just because he is not able to find a space where he can easily access this kind of funding, but also still remain legally registered within the legal regime that he wanted to register. I think that is also the same with accessing social and impact investment funds. So what I'm trying to say here is that it has been hard for even these guys who have been in the game for quite some time, because the government, I think, is stuck on use the existing legal framework, use the existing policies, use the existing different kind of registration regime and find where you fit without really considering what repercussions, what impact would that have on you in terms of accessing different kind of financing. They really don't, that's not their business. And then also there is low market and economic incentive for impact transfer. Again, still goes back to the challenges with the policy. And what I've seen someone like Gladys do is basically work with other entities that have interest in the kind of work that she's doing, and connecting with them to transfer the impact of their work. But again, that still does not solve it. Neither for her, at least in terms of transferring that impact, it does provide an avenue, but to where the geography where this work is being transferred to, if the legal regime again and the policy framework again does not really support those kind of collaborations, then it means it's still a challenge. So I'd say all these guys, they have not, and this was very important for me to highlight, they have not successfully addressed these challenges. And these are the challenges that they identify as core. And these are social entrepreneurs across Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania. I've also been involved in some of these conversations in Rwanda and also Uganda and Tanzania. And the story is basically the same. There is need for a policy and legal framework that will support social entrepreneurs, not just along these lines and the lines that Colin has mentioned, but basically the entire value chain of social entrepreneurship, the entire value chain of social enterprises, from startup all the way to scaling to impact transfer. So we as Ashoka, we believe that despite all these challenges, we still have to find a way of working with government. Colin mentioned this already. They are the prime movers of stuff here. We're talking about the strategy for development, vision, whatever. It's the government that comes up with this. We talk about the different legislations, it's the government. So what we are doing as Ashoka is that we have a course just to help social entrepreneurs understand and figure out how best to work with government. And the way we are looking at it is basically what we always say at Ashoka is that you don't teach social entrepreneurs. You don't give them fish, you don't teach them how to fish, but you revolutionize the fishing industry. And so that's the approach that as Ashoka we are thinking. Let's not approach the government and tell them, hey, you need to tinker with this legislation here to, kind of give me some leeway when it comes to taxation or when it comes to, training of social entrepreneurs. That entire value chain, let's not go piecemeal. Let's completely revolutionize how the government views social entrepreneurs. So the big question for me here is how can social entrepreneurs collaborate with government to really accelerate policy and legal changes? Because this is what we need for the growth of the sector to scale up and potentially also to transfer some of this incredible impact that we're seeing. I'm happy that, One Acre, Colin, you talked about your presence now in Nigeria. So how do we make it possible for many social enterprises to replicate and to transfer their impact in other geographies? I want to give it just at that so that then, we can hear also from the rest. Thank you.
Many thanks, Colin and Vincent. Those very interesting points, and it was very enlightening to hear to get the detailed sectorial perspective as well as the broader perspective on the challenges and the need for a policy and legal framework. I will open it up to questions. I mean, we're a small group, so if you want to come in, you can just come in. We have some questions on the chat. And I guess we can address those if you want to, obviously. But I think Ella had a question, was on the research, specifically in Kenya or a wider place. Ella, maybe you can just go ahead and speak up.
Yes, just a quick question for you, Vincent. Thank you. That was very, very interesting. I had a quick question about the research when you were talking about the gender splits across the various facets that you had there. Was that specifically in Kenya, or was that you done that wider across your network?
Yeah, thank you. That was specifically in Kenya. But then also the social entrepreneurs, there's a network in Uganda that has also showed interest. And also for us, I mean, we're thinking if we could do this kind of mapping across so that then we can get whatever nuanced sort of perspective from every country, because I mean, maybe something like this gender sort of perspective in how these different challenges are impacting them might be different from one country to the other. So we'd want to get that. And obviously, like Rwanda, I think it will be different.
Yeah, I was on a call similar to this yesterday, specifically focused on the northeast of England, and there was a long conversation about how women were overrepresented in social enterprise in that area. So this is really interesting. Thank you for that.
And Claudia, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, and I know that there was someone else that also had my name, since I shared the link from which I registered. So I can get started, and then next person, please. So my question is about, it's for the two of you actually. If you would have some suggestions to facilitate SE registration, are there any models that you have seen that worked that you could recommend to different governments? And I'm thinking, for example, my experience is a project that a World Bank project that we are now working in Turkey. And there, if you want to be a social enterprise, the closer that you get from registration is to register as a social cooperative, which makes things difficult for social enterprises because there is a lot of, in addition to building your case, building your social enterprise model, if you're building a cooperative, there is a lot of extra work, right? Because it's not one person leading the whole thing. You have to motivate a group of people that will take the leadership of the whole enterprise, which make things much more difficult. But that's how, if you want to get any help from the government, financial help, collaborate better with local government agencies, you would need to have registered as a social enterprise. So what I'm saying is there is this specific type of registration there in Turkey, but it's not making their life much easier, and they're complaining. So what are your suggestions?
Vincent, do you want to start with that? You might have a better perspective than me, but I'm happy to chime in as well.
Yeah, so Claudia, that's a good question. So at the moment, I would say, you know, there are quite a number of I think case studies that we've been looking at, and if I can speak specifically regarding the process in Kenya, I think we've looked at the UK, we're looking at Ghana, we're also looking at Indonesia. So I would say, and a couple of others, I'm just forgetting on the names, but we are, obviously, we don't want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to this process as well, right? So we are looking at what is working. And also for us at the moment, I think it's what really accelerated the process. Is it maybe like the question that you've asked? I don't know whether it's you, because now, you know, so many people are appearing under your name, Claudia. But yeah, there's a question there like, you know, what would have World Bank, partners like World Bank. So we want to understand what is the ingredient we need to have in terms of, you know, building a broader alliance, coalition of, you know, kind of different players. Is this what it takes to really accelerate this? And then the bolts and nuts of where this is already existing. What is it that, you know, we can easily adapt? Because then I think one of the suggestions that have been floated in all this conversation has been, let's also try to chew gum and cross the road at the same time. So we're thinking holistic overhaul, or just establishing a policy that, coming up with a policy that will probably establish a social enterprise commission or council or something like that. At the same time, we could be looking at some low-hanging fruits. Look at the legislations across, and where they really press on social entrepreneurs. For instance, if it's in the NGO registration, what is there about this particular legal regime that is such a barrier to social enterprises, so that they can't thrive? If it's on company limited by guarantee, what is it that is such a huge, pain that we probably need a fast amendment, like very quick amendment on the legislation, so that these are worked out as we work towards a bigger one. So we are in the process of really trying to learn from different jurisdictions, and as Ashoka also leveraging that entire network also, especially where our fellows have been actively involved. Like, what did it really take? So I think I would say we are open to that. That's basically the way to go and to fast track this. But I don't know whether, Colin, you have other perspective.
No, it's beyond my pay grade to know, what the right legal status is. We have a good sense of what that is, but maybe to what Vincent's saying, maybe it's about approaching it as somewhat of an organic process, right? I think, Claudia, your example is a great one where there could be a downside to a new legal registration status if we don't think about it carefully. So how do we not rush into it? And I think Vincent was sort of outlining a process of consultation with the government, which sort of combines, I think, looking at other countries and how they define social enterprises, while also sort of letting something evolve organically, so we can make sure we don't sort of rush into a bad solution. I think two things to point out in that organic process, though. I think one is just how we define social enterprises is critical, right? The reality is if we give accommodations, every company that's making money will define itself as a social enterprise. They'll just call their product good for the world, and then, hey, we're a social enterprise, But I think we really have to focus on the populations. Like, are you serving populations that are low income and vulnerable, where markets have failed? And can you prove that you're delivering value to those populations? So I think we have to sort of hold ourselves to account as a sector and create a definition that is, that puts some boundaries on what a social enterprise is, rather than just a company that, thinks they do something good in the world. And then the second point to make is, I think, and I think Vincent got at this as well, is beyond the registration status, there would be a tremendous value in just some sort of a dedicated government agency to help social enterprises navigate the complexity of government bureaucracy. If we think about the examples I gave, it would have been wonderful if there was some agency of just, experienced bureaucrats in the government that have the phone numbers of everyone in finance and at the tax authority and wherever, that, a social enterprise could go to and say, we have this regulatory challenge, help us solve it, right? And that would, it wouldn't require even a new regulatory regime. It would just require a few dedicated human resources to help us navigate, this massive opaque bureaucracy. So maybe that just reinforces again that I think there are many ways of us solving this problem, but we're not doing any of it right now. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, Claudia.
It helps a lot. Yeah, you have hit many of the points that we see in the project. In reality in Turkey, and this need for a dedicated agency. Yeah, no one is actually holding the SE agenda, and someone should be doing this.
Actually, we have Alphanar on the line too, and Alphanar is actually one of the enabling organizations. I don't know, Rhea, if you're available to talk. But it would be interesting to see if you guys have had any experience promoting regulatory changes, or if not, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just know I have a working relationship with Alphanar in another project, so it's kind of good to hear. But before you answer, let me have Johannes come in. Go ahead, Johannes.
Thanks, Elaine. I guess I think that paper that you referred to, Elaine, could be very helpful, because presumably, learning across countries and regimes, legal and, by the way, tax regimes, I think is going to be very important. At the same time, I suspect it's all probably country specific, because every country has its own institutional, legal, tax, and what have you, institutional setup. And so my hunch is what you need is actually a team of experts that includes lawyers, very, very importantly. Without lawyers, you're not going to get anywhere here. Secondly, you need tax experts, because very often the status of enterprises is linked to their tax status. Thirdly, you need understanding of different layers of government, because my hunch is it isn't just national government, it's probably also local government and or maybe even state and provincial governments that have sort of, you know, policy and regulatory authority over the way business treated and run. So and of course you need experts who understand social enterprises and their needs and their particular status and requirements. So my question, I guess, to both Vincent and to you in the World Bank colleagues, but maybe also Colin and others, is so do we have an example where, and Kenya, you know, where actually, say, the World Bank or other external partners have worked systematically with government over what probably takes a year or more, a period of time, to look at what is the institutional setup, what are the requirements for effectively supporting social enterprises, and then, yes, is it necessary and appropriate actually to set up a separate agency or within an agency a window where social enterprises can have kind of a one-stop response to whatever they require. So I'm sort of wondering, do we have a specific case, and in Kenya specifically, has the World Bank or anybody else done anything systematically to respond to this pretty obvious need? Thank you.
I can highlight quickly the one country that we've seen where they've actually played a very active role, and that was in Jamaica. Now, Jamaica's a lot smaller, it's not as large, but they had SIBA, who was a social enterprise, was actually funded by, I think, by the UK. And they actually worked very closely with the government. The government helped introduce a category for social enterprises in the MSME strategy. So it actually got incorporated into their strategy. I think Ghana has also incorporated social enterprises into their strategy. So it's one thing like to incorporate into the strategy, and other things like a registration. So I will share the paper. I think I have to email it out, or email the link. I don't have it active right now, but it is actually a good paper that looks at how some countries have used working definitions versus legal definitions, because jumping into legal definitions kind of sometimes limits it very much. And then there's a whole issue of monitoring. How do you make sure that this is a social enterprise? How do you certify it? And so other countries have looked at certification. I know, like in Saudi Arabia, we were working with them on their social enterprise agenda, and they decided to go with, not the certification. I have like such a horrible memory, but I think they decided not to go with the legal definition, but more with the certification, because this way, if things change, you wouldn't have to change the definition as much. So there were pros and cons to each of the different ways to do it. And it also depends on the resources that the country has. I really think it's a good idea to have an agency that can act as an advocate for the social enterprise sector, because if it's just one enterprise, it's too small for the government to pay attention. Even if it's 5 enterprises, it's too small. But if you can build it on a sectoral basis to say, okay, in agriculture, we're facing X, Y, and Z. In health, we're facing X, Y, and Z. And if we can eliminate that, we can really help improve these markets, then I think that would be more conducive. And then you can build the case, right? You can have other universities helping to do the research to say, okay, by doing this kind of policy, we can get these kind of results. So it's not like a biased perspective when governments are, I mean, you might be a social enterprise, but they're still very suspicious of like social enterprises. They're suspicious of any commercial enterprise, right? And I think socializing them on this, and the social enterprise sector is actually another step that's also needed as well. I know we're running short on time, so I just want to quickly give it to Colin and Vincent to respond if they have anything else, or if you have any other questions, we're happy to. And I know, Nick, we didn't quite get to your question yet, but I think we'll try and see. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I don't have any more response, but I see Nick has another question. Nick, do you want to just ask it? Sure.
Yeah, so gladly. Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Daniels. I lead policy and partnerships for a social enterprise in Kenya called Food for Education, which runs school feeding programs. We currently feed 30,000 children every day with hot, nutritious meal, and we are planning to scale to 100,000 by the end of this year. Importantly, our meals are subsidized, so parents pay 15 shilling cost per meal, and donors pay the balance of around 14 to 15 shillings per meal as well. I think maybe my first question was sort of a reflection really on a situation that I've encountered in the past where there's just a sort of disconnection really within government that, you know, one agency, let's say the NGO board, says you're not an NGO, you have to register as a company, and then you go to the company's registrar and they say no, go back to the NGO board. So that's definitely something I've seen in Tanzania in the past, and I think that you know, it's just a common challenge that maybe an alternative status or just a broader range of statuses would help solve. And then if there's time, I'm certainly interested to unpack the sort of the profit making versus non-profit making requirement and the definition of social enterprises. I notice the Social Enterprise Society in Kenya explicitly says that social enterprises may be for-profit making. So just curious to know what people feel about that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Vincent.
Okay, yeah, I could respond. Nick, I think towards the end, I didn't get whether you said the Social Enterprise Society of Kenya insists on the definition of social enterprises to be for-profit or something. Maybe you can just put it in the chat. But Elaine, what I just wanted to respond to, I mean, I'm really curious, and this is really, I mean, would be quite an insight if we say we can do this without necessarily defining, because I mean, I get the pros and cons of defining what a social enterprise is, because that's basically where I think, having been involved in the process, that's where we took quite a huge amount of time trying to distinguish between social enterprises that, you know, basically businesses that are doing traditional business, but doing it for good, and entities that are by and large from the core, you know, mission driven, you know, and those that are also strictly focusing on its impact first, profit second, you know, and those. So I'm just curious, like how, I mean, that sort of understanding, you know, comes about where we say, okay, let's just continue with the other bits of this without really nailing it down, drilling it down to a very specific definition, because for many social entrepreneurs and for government, actually, it is the definition where everything unravels for them. I just at that very beginning, because then if you go and you are an SME, they'll tell you, okay, I mean, you are just a company, right? I mean, you register as a company limited by guarantee. So there is, I'm just curious on that as well. But then for Nick, yes, it's yeah, I think so. So that's part of what we've been trying to get a consensus around. We took quite a bit of time. And if you look at the draft that we worked on, it's still very much a draft, still needs to go through a couple of iteration and validation by the stakeholders. But it seems like there is two sort of definitions that are being floated. One that revolves around the individual and one that revolves around the enterprise. And I think for the enterprise here, there is an inclination towards accepting that it has to be geared towards social good in one way or the other.
Yeah, that's helpful, Vincent. I wonder if I could add one quick thing, Elaine, and I know we're out of time, unfortunately, but I think this last question from Nick is critical. And I would just say something you said in the past, Elaine, is, which is really helpful, is I think, and to your point, Vincent, about the problems of the definition, I think if we get away from the definition of the social enterprise a little and maybe focus on the populations we're trying to serve, that is a helpful way of thinking about this, right? Whatever nonprofit, for-profit, I think what we have to prove to government is that we're serving the most poor and the most vulnerable. And I would say, and Johannes, you've heard me make this point before, is it is very hard to make money when you are serving the most poor and the most vulnerable. So I guess I'm always skeptical of social enterprises that think they'll become profitable by serving the very poor and the very vulnerable. But look, if they want to become profitable and they think they can, as long as they're serving the right population and providing value and impact, you know, I don't think it matters. But I do think that, like, we do need to hold our own sector to account to that. Like, are we actually serving the people that really need the help? And I think then maybe we pivot away from how we define ourselves a little bit and focus on, can we prove that we're delivering impact to the most poor and the most vulnerable?
Okay. So I think we are over time and we will stop there, but I think this is a good conversation to keep going, because I think actually coming up with a solution is the next step, right? You know, what can we do to actually get the government to work with social enterprises to resolve some of these regulatory, and, you know, I mean, technically, I mean, it would be nice that, you know, to have an agency that advocates, but maybe there's also stuff that you can do on the far end. Like, you know, if you are providing social impact, then the government come in and say, okay, we can give you a tax offset for that once it's proven that you've actually done it. So I think this is all stuff we can mull around a little bit, and we'll try and do a little bit more on our next webinar as well. And we hope you join. If you get, if you're interested in joining our distribution list, I don't know if you received the original email or if you were forwarded, just drop Claudia an email to have your name included, and we'll add you to our distribution list. So with that, thank you, Colin, thank you, Vincent, and thank you everyone for participating. And I will send out the paper when we send out the recording as well. So take care. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.